Started. I should introduce myself. I'm Laura McMillan. I'm NetHope's Chief Operating Officer. This is my 4th summit, and it's so great to see so many of you that I've seen for year after year, and so great to meet new people. So if you're one of the people who've been here year after year, I hope you're seeking out those that are new and making them feel welcome and letting them know what NetHope is all about. Before we get into the details of today, or some other housekeeping items about the rest of the week, I want to invite up Pietro Galli. Pietro has been the chair of the Agenda Steering Committee this year, has done an amazing job, and I want to give him a chance to welcome you and tell you a little bit about what you can expect this week.
Good morning. Welcome to Vancouver and welcome to this beautiful city. Today it's amazing outside, but we're going to spend most of it this time. So this morning when I was reviewing what to say, I actually tried to think about how do I get here? You know, why am I standing here? And I think 8 months ago, with a 7-month child and having just moved home, and somebody asked, so if you are in this position now, be careful, because in a couple of months somebody may pop the question. So echoing what Lauren said yesterday, this is mostly about thanking people, because the fact that we're here today doing this is really the result of a collective effort of member organizations, NetHope staff, sponsors, partners, and I would say also some friends or new friends. That your session didn't make it, but keep it on the agenda. Maybe next year we can bring it up. Thanks to everybody who, all the partners that are setting up trainings for Friday. We're looking forward to these, and please sign up if you haven't already done so. Not to forget anything, we have a new agenda, online agenda this year, agenda platform. Please use it, even when Wi-Fi comes back on. I think it's down this morning. Please use it to give us feedback, not just on the individual sessions, but if you can also on the whole structure of these 3 or 4 days, because we try to do something different. So this year, we've tried to structure it around themes, and every day, starting from today, has a different theme. Today is going to be the digital nonprofit, tomorrow programs and refugee response, and then on Thursday, it's going to be about information security and data protection. We're trying something new. Let us know how it went. Let us know how it goes. And I'm already catching myself thinking about what we can do differently next year. So if you do have these thoughts, please jot them down and let us know, because it will be helpful, and you'll probably have forgotten in 6 months. I would like to conclude thanking the Agenda Steering Committee, because I may have done a bit, but other people did much more, and we actually worked collectively. So for the last 6 months, every Wednesday we had a call, and then we had other calls on other days. So if you could all stand, you know where you are. Please stand. It was great to work with you, and I'm really impressed. So I'm jet lagged, like heavily jet lagged now, but this 9-hour difference and more, I think we experienced it also during our calls. So we had people, I was about to leave work and sort of, having to pick up my kid or something, and from kindergarten, and others were waking up and getting their kids out of the door. So it was an interesting 6 months together. I would like to mention one thing though. And Frederick, where are you? I can't see, but if you could stand up or show yourself. I think I must really stress that without Frederick, from my perspective, and maybe there's many more, but from my perspective, this is not possible. This wouldn't come together. So if we can all give a big round of applause to Frederick. Frederick is amazing in letting you know that you're behind schedule and reminding you that you need to get back on track, and he did a great job with me especially. One last thing, since I'm up here, I'm going to use this moment. If there's any other Italian in the room, can you please stand up and show yourself? There are no other Italians in it. Yes, well, no. I don't count. Fully Italian. Okay. Sorry. So that's one of my points on next year's agenda. We need some more Italians on. Thank you, and enjoy the week. Thank you.
Thank you, Pietro. In case you didn't see people standing, you see their names here, the members who served on the Agenda Steering Committee, and a number of staff sit on as well, but most of them are listed there on the Summit Logistics team. So you can see it's actually a fairly small group of people that put this week on. There are a few people who probably did a lot, including like Lauren Woodman, who are not listed here. But it's our pleasure, and we're just thrilled to be here and to get this party going. So thank you all. The next thing I want to do is acknowledge that we have 3 new members that joined us during the last year. You can see their names here on the screen. Over this week, we're going to introduce all 3 of them. This morning, Marie Stokes is prepared to introduce themselves. And I don't know if we have somebody coming to the stage to do that. Wonderful. Come on up. And then over the rest of the week, we'll get to meet these other 2. Good morning.
Good morning. We're still very light. I almost didn't come here because on my way to the meeting room, I saw the sign, Canadian Lumber Standards Accreditation Board. I thought it sounded interesting. I was tempted to go there, but then I wouldn't be here. So delighted to be a member of the NetHope community, and just a few words about what we do at Mary Stokes International. This is Harriet. She's 19. She lives in Zambia, and she's who we work for. The Harriets of this world. The Harriets of this world who want to finish school without getting pregnant. But the problem is a lot of the Harriets of this world don't have access to family planning. They don't know where to get it. They don't know what the options are, probably. And it leads to unwanted pregnancies. It leads to deaths. Things that could be avoided. And we do know that the access to contraception and to safe abortion does make a positive difference, not only to the individuals, but also to the communities they live in. Harriet wants to be a primary school teacher, and having family planning available to her, that's what she's going to go and do. She's going to be a primary school teacher. She's going to help her community by doing that. And then one day she is going to decide her choice, her timing, to have children. So our MSI colleagues and team members work in 37 countries. There's 13,000 of us who go through different channels. We have outreach teams that go into remote areas. We have clinics in urban areas. And this is the impact that we're generating. So it's really all about giving access to family planning methods. We've reached over 25 million women last year. It's avoiding death from unsafe abortion. And it's really just making sure that the Harriets of this world can live their lives, can have an education, and can choose when they want to have children. And what we do in Global Information Services within MSI, just a few words here. The usual stuff. Probably most of you will be active in the same areas. So I'm looking forward to collaborating with NetHope members and partners. Thanks again for having us. Thank you.
So a few reminders for you all about this week and some of the things that we need you to pay attention to. First of all, as Pietro mentioned, by now I would hope, since we're 2 days in here, that you have figured out the online agenda. And on that agenda, you can create your own personalized agenda of where you're going to go. Want to remind you, just as Pietro did, we have workshops on Friday, and if you have not yet signed up for those and are planning to be here, please sign up for those. Our presenters need to know how many people are going to be in the room and what to plan for, so please make some decisions. We have some great choices on Friday. You may not have noticed, but hopefully you did, that if you go into the description of the presentation on your agenda, There's a little bold words right at the bottom that say broadcast link. This is something you should share with the folks at home, because if the description has that word on it, it means it's going to be live streamed. And this is part of what Frederick's doing up here. Frederick, who does everything. So please make sure that you share that. People just, all they need to know is to go into the description and that they can click on that and they can see the live streamed item. And of course, most of these will all be stored then on the Solution Center, and we can access them after the fact as well. Session evaluations are also in that position, that program description, that presentation description. So as you get up and leave any of the sessions you're in, please take 2 seconds to rate, give feedback so that we can continue to improve these for future years. And that applies to, I think, just about every session that happens, whether it's in the plenary session or whether it's the breakout sessions. Lauren, I was going to mention the digital skills chart, but are you mentioning this in your speech later? Okay, I'm going to skip this one then. Wanted to call out, we have at least 2 vendors out in the exhibit hall who have let me know that they would like to do raffles on Thursday morning. So please go by the Planson booth and the Oracle booth and drop your business card. And there may be others, and if you're somebody who knows there's another one, let me know and we'll add them to the list. But in the meantime, everybody go get your business cards in there. And then one final note, Pathable is the online agenda we're using this year. It has some great improvements over what we've used in the past, but we have run into a bit of a challenge around wait lists. There is a dinner tonight, I believe, and maybe something else later in the week, as well as the field trips tomorrow that have limited space in them, and you may be signing up for those. Here is the key. If you go in and look at the full agenda, not your personalized one, but the full one, and you see your name there, you're good to go. It means you got in. If you do not see your name there, you are on the wait list. So until you see your name show up, don't plan to go. I know right now that the flyover Canada field trip for tomorrow is full. So if you do not see your name on there and you don't have a sticker on the back of your badge, you are not going on that field trip. The good news is there are still a number of spaces left on the UBC field trip. And if you'd like to go on that one, please mark it on your agenda and stop by the registration desk and get a sticker for the back of your name tag. And I believe the same challenge is for one of the sponsor dinners tonight, and you guys probably know what that is better than I do. So a couple items of note specifically about today. First of all, as I mentioned, really full day. We have an incredible agenda. If you haven't noticed, we have a number of CEOs from member organizations with us today, which we're thrilled to have them here. Lauren's going to be leading some sessions for them specifically today. You may all remember that we have the governor of Washington State coming to greet us at noon today. And the logistics around that, anytime you get a high-level official in the room, things get a little more complicated. We will be breaking this morning at 11:30, and between 11:30 and 12, we all need to go back out in the hallway, get our lunch, and bring it back in here, because we really need to be seated and ready to go at noon, which is when the governor will speak. So please try to follow that protocol so that we're all in our places and ready to go. He's on a pretty tight time schedule, and we want to make sure we make the best use of his time. I want to also point out that on the agenda, we're planning to do our annual group picture today at 3:45 in the lobby. So please join us there. If you're not in it, it won't be right. We need all of us. And then last but not least, after our full day, we have a happy hour that's sponsored by Unit 4 today in the Cole Harbor Bistro, which is where we had the pre-summit social on Sunday night. So please join us over there. And I think I made up most of our time, which is great. So now I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Lauren Woodman, NetHope's CEO, and she's going to take us through the rest of the morning.
All of a sudden the music came on really, really loud in here. And I thought, well, that might be a fun way to start the day every day with just a little bit of a 30-second dance party. So I'm glad you made up for the good morning. Otherwise, we would have had a 30-second dance party to kick us off. I'm going to spend a few minutes sort of teeing up today. As Pietro noted, when he did his opening. We're going to spend a lot of time today talking about the digital nonprofit and where we as an organization are looking for the future and how we support all of our member organizations around the world. And certainly over the last 15, 16 years, NetHope has gotten really, really good at supporting member organizations around technology. But as the world continues to change, the way that we need to support our member organization also changes. And so we've started to dive into this question over the last several months and look at what does that shift look like and how do we need to evolve the work that we are doing in order to support our members most effectively. As Laura mentioned, today we have with us a number of CEOs from a number of our member organizations. And a number of them joined us bright and early this morning to start some of the conversations around what are they seeing from a leadership perspective. What is, not only are things changing inside NetHope and inside the technology sector and in the world around us, but really within the international system. We continue to see, let's call it evolution, and changes that are affecting the way that all of our member organizations work in countries around the world. And so we'll spend some time today getting their reflections and their thoughts about how those changes are affecting our work and how they are looking at planning for the future. We also have a number of our long-term partners and some of our new partners joining us today to talk about how they are thinking about the nonprofit sector and supporting the work that all of our member organizations are doing. But before we get started, I want to tee up something for you. NetHope is now 52 members strong. We are a broad organization, and we've been doing some work over the last several months and looking at what really is the shape of that footprint. And for years we have said that NetHope member organizations work in 180 countries. We think that's about right. Have 20,000 partners. We think that's really low. We think IFRC alone probably has 20,000 partners, so we think we're probably higher than that. And we were looking at sort of what's the footprint in terms of the scope of the work that we do. So NetHope member organizations, we think, and we're double checking all the numbers, but we think that NetHope member organizations make up somewhere around 60% of all international aid that gets delivered for nonprofits around the world. Think about that for a second. If the tipping point, right, the proverbial tipping point is 17%, we passed that a long time ago. And so the ability of these organizations sitting in this room that came here this week and said, let's go get something done together to actually affect change is actually quite significant. And so as you step into working groups yesterday, as you sit through sessions today, as you talk with one another, as you think about the challenges that we collectively need to take on, know that working together, we can actually make a huge change. And we can make sure that all of our member organizations and our partners are doing the very best that we can in order to serve the communities in which we work. With that as a lead in, I want to get some perspectives from some folks that see the world at a different level and work at a different level. So let me introduce and invite up to the stage a couple of our CEOs to have a conversation with us. First, I'm going to invite Maria Cahanti, CEO of Pro Mujer. Many of you know Maria. She joined the NetHope board a couple of years ago. And while maybe Pietro doesn't think she's Italian enough to be counted as an Italian, she certainly brings enough passion to the conversation to really liven it up. Maria, come on up. I also want to introduce Dominique McSorley, CEO of Concern Worldwide. Many of you know Concern quite well, and because Concern has been an active NetHope member for many, many years. Dominic has a long history in working in the humanitarian space and has certainly seen some changes over the years that he will share with us. And last but not least, I haven't seen Patrick. Oh, there's Patrick right there in front of me. You really can't see anything. Invite Patrick Fine, CEO of FHI 360. FHI, many of you know FHI has been around for many, many years and does a lot of work, not just in the humanitarian space, but primarily in the development space and looking at all of the issues associated with that. And so with that, thank you all for joining us here today. It is a privilege for us to be able to get your input from a different perspective. And Dominique, let me start with you. You've been working in the humanitarian space for many, many years. You know what it's like to work in challenging environments. You've both done it personally and obviously lead an organization that does a tremendous amount of work in that. Where do you think the big changes are happening in the international community? Are we doing a good job collectively in supporting fragile states?
And thanks very much, Lauren. And let me just say it's a real pleasure to be here with NetHope, who we've a part association. I miscalculated. I thought there was 4 people and I was going to be second on, but there you go. That's my first mistake of the day. Great to be in Vancouver as well. The weather's very average, which I guess that's a good thing. In brief, let me just say, I mean, Concern is approaching its 50 years. It's kind of interesting because we're kind of looking back and looking forward at the same time. And I think when you look at organizations, how they start is kind of an indication, of some of the elements I would hope that we contain. And what's interesting is 50 years ago, it was as a response to Biafra that a young Irish couple came together, invited 40 people into their room and said, we've got to do something. And it was sparked by the fact that televisions had spread across Ireland. And so every night on the black and white television, Biafra was the first televised famine. And it hit a nerve, and it hit the conscience of a nation that itself had experienced famine. And I think within 2 years they'd raised something like 6 million and mounted what was then the largest humanitarian response out of Ireland. And I think communications was a real challenge. Once you got that going, how do you ensure that the stories are coming back, the progress, all of those kind of things. And when I joined Concern 35 years ago, it was ironic, because they said, okay, you have to communicate, it's really important. So there's a fax machine that doesn't work very well. There's a telex machine, and write a lot of letters. But I think technology has transformed first the communications within the organization, and then secondly it transformed how we actually operate the programming. And I think a lot of that actually came through the partnership with NetHope. So, we can talk about our digital transfer and our cash transfers and how that's working. But I think the real challenge now today is almost the reverse of that problem. So when famine is declared, on the 27th of February in South Sudan in 2 regions, unlike genocide, it doesn't require a formal UN response, but what it should, at minimum, is require demand global attention. And global attention brings money, resources, and solutions. So, on that day, the two big stories in Europe was Brexit, and the big story on that day was President Trump's fake news story on Sweden. So we've got a real problem here, I think, in terms of this connection to the public. And how do we ensure that, not just to the public and the donors, but how do we challenge this? And I don't even know if it's indifference, but I think it's also distraction. So we don't just have the television that's telling us what we do. We have competing social media where stories, stay on for about 10 seconds and aren't grasping the attention of the public and the donors. And that's resulted in, a humanitarian lifeline of 120 million people, where probably at best the resources for 50% of those are there. And I think it also is that the international aid community are actually overwhelmed by the scale of crisis, by the challenges that we face. And it's not because we don't have the knowledge and the science and the technology. Actually, we do have those. That's the great story. Prevention is a great story. All the work that we're doing in Ethiopia or Somalia is preventing people from slipping even further down. So, just one point I think is how do we reach in and use technology more, because others are using it against us. We have a very different landscape now where non-state terrorist actors are using social media in a way that is very effective and very destructive. And I think there was a report out, it's Tom Fletcher, who'd been a foreign policy advisor, I think, in the UK, and he has a report out about the UN in the network age and what needs to happen. And he suggested, among about 15 things, 6 of which I probably agreed with, but one of them was about an aggressive campaign targeted at youth around values of respect, decency, on a much, much more conservative level. So I'm only touching kind of on the public side because I think in some ways the success and concern as an organisation has been, you know, the 25 million that we raise every year from the public, but it's an ageing population. And we really need to engage the next generation because it is their future. And I think the opportunity is around the Sustainable Development Goals. Because I'll be honest, 17-year-olds get the goals probably faster than the politicians do. And I think that's one of the things that we really need to focus on.
The Sustainable Development Goals are quite comprehensive. I mean, they're quite broad in the way that they focus. You know, Patrick, at FHI 360, you guys have a quite broad portfolio in terms of the scope of work that you do. How do you approach, you know, all of the problems out there, all of the capabilities that FHI 360 has? Do you see that work coming closer together? Does it have a greater effect that way?
Yeah. I am on. Before I address that, let me just say I'm so happy to be here and to hear the conversations that are going on because they're so relevant to the challenges that we face today. And I'm thrilled that NetHope is launching a Center for the Digital Nonprofit. If there ever was a time when such a center or such an initiative is needed, it is now. I know that at FHI 360, we struggle with the notion that in order for us to be an effective actor, we've got to become a tech company that addresses human needs and a organization that addresses human needs that uses technology. And it's not easy to combine those things in a coherent, effective, and efficient way. So I expect that you will get I've got lots of questions, lots of suggestions for agenda items for the center and for NetHope, and I suspect that over the course of this week that you'll fill up the agenda. Now, with one of the issues that we particularly grapple with is how to take a comprehensive approach to fashioning and implementing development solutions. Because we started about 4 years ago to look at the evidence base for what we call integrated development. Some people call it multi-sectoral development. But it's this idea of a people-centered approach that takes a comprehensive look at how do you address needs as opposed to just addressing one specific problem. So for nutrition is a good example. You might address the issue of lack of food, so underfeeding, and as an effort to try to address stunting. And a lot of that's been one approach, is to do the sprinkles and the supplementary feeding as a way of reducing stunting. But if you don't simultaneously address the issue of infections in the mother, then you won't have a significant impact, even if a significant impact on reducing stunting, even if you provide the supplemental feeding. So it's necessary to look at things in a more holistic way. And our motto at FHI 360 is the science of improving lives. So we put a really strong emphasis on having data-informed, evidence-based approaches to the work we do. So we started looking at what does the evidence base say for taking integrated approaches. And what we found is that the evidence base is pretty clear that more comprehensive approaches provide a stronger impact in terms of addressing specific development challenges. Now, to bring this back to the SDGs, when we started this, there were a number of organizations thinking and talking about it. PAC, in particular, had an initiative that was looking at integrated approaches as providing leadership in the sector. But it still was not, if you will, an idea whose time has come. And when we would raise it at conferences and meetings, we'd often get a lot of resistance from people who would say, well, look at the PEPFAR program, the approach to HIV. That's a single focus, single sector program, and that's arguably the most effective development initiative in history. So siloed approaches have their place. We don't dispute that siloed approaches have their place, but we wanted to broaden that conversation. And what I've seen since we started around 2013 is that there really has been an uptake. And right now, I see many donors designing programs with the term integrated approaches in it. We didn't see that in 2013 and 2014. We see that often now. So we see that there has been a recognition. And then one of the main things that has driven that is the Sustainable Development Goals, because by their very design, they operate in a comprehensive, mutually dependent, interdependent way. So the SDGs are an integrated approach to addressing global human development needs. So, and that's where technology and data come in, because in order to fashion solutions, to be able to monitor and track whether these integrated approaches are actually delivering value for the cost, requires a more sophisticated data management, data analytics, data collection systems than we've had in the past, and that's one of the things that we've been focusing on. If you take a more complex approach to solving the problem, then you need more sophisticated systems to support that approach. And those are digital systems. I mean, those are technology systems. And we're to be honest, we're struggling to figure out how do we do that? How do we do it in a cost-effective manner that we can afford, that we can convince our funders to pay for, and that deliver real value.
That's important. I was going to warn Patrick not to talk too much about agenda items, but Pietro might grab you on the way out the door and ask you to chair the steering committee next year. Maria, you've been in both the private sector and in the nonprofit sector and back and forth between in hybrids of the two. You know, Patrick raises an interesting question, which is how do we use these tools effectively? What have you learned in going back and forth around, you know, how much do the models overlap, or what can we learn from either? How do you apply that program here?
Well, buongiorno, Pietro, and good morning, everybody else. I have a very sad grandmother right now, but no, I think that there's a convergence in terms of where the private sector and civil society are, right? And if you look into the pressure, the transparency, the very data, when we're talking about communication and television was the trigger for us to see what was happening in other regions. Well, today, technology has been the linchpin for full transformation of states. We've seen states go up and go down within a week. And we've seen it in real time. So there is a different pace. From what I've seen, both as working in corporations, working as investors, as well as working in the non-profit sectors, is that we're looking into the same coin through different facets at the same side. And there is a need for us to be on our side, and I completely agree, we need to be more productive, we need to use better technology we have to have a better cost structure. Some of our organizations have become so focused on the mission that they forgot to become truly and operational and doing a better job about on how to most utilize the resources that we get from philanthropic capital in a more efficient way. So sometimes we see it that way, but at the same time, the business sector is also looking into it, going through the same challenges. Say, okay, no matter what it is, they may be selling widgets, they may be providing a service. There is an image, there is an expectation. More and more, there's an expectation that companies have to do good as well. It's not just bringing the goods to the table, but it's also do it well and do good, and then have some kind of impact to society. So the whole idea of increasing stakeholder share is just not just quite there anymore, and there is more expectations. So these are movements that have started a long time ago. Sometimes from the folks that are in impact investing think that this has been happening in the last 5 to 10 years. It's not. It's just becoming more global. So from that perspective, I see that we're facing, the private sector is facing a question of identity. Okay, how do we do well? How do we bring profits to the table? But at the same time, how do we do good? And then nonprofits are also facing and saying, how do we do that? So at one point, the medium is not going to be as important. It is what we are looking to. Are we here to save a river? Does it matter if it's a for-profit or non-profit? If it's the river, it doesn't get it. So at some point, that's going to put a lot of pressures on the nonprofits, because in some cases, we have not really become on the forefront of technology. We have not taken that lead of innovation. We have taken leads on other fronts, but not on the operational side in some cases. So I think this is the moment, and I think this is the moment for us to look into data, to look into, to become more fully informed, and to start to be much more proactive and anticipate the future. What is it that we need to do, and how will we get there? So a few things that I see is, from us at Program Heritage, is that we actually are also merging into a hybrid state. So as we grew, and today we operate in 5 countries in Latin America. Right now we operate in the financial sector, in the healthcare sector, in the education sector. We entered areas that were fully regulated. So the financial sector, for example, I am regulated just like any other bank in many of the countries where we operate, and we need to move on. We need to get ahead. So in some cases, that demands that we actually become a for-profit entity in some of the cases. So now we're having a hybrid space. And if we don't catch up with what our financial clients need, and we don't anticipate, and we also do not come up and get ahead of the curve of some of the other banks, we're not going to be able to address the needs of all these women in Latin America in a way that is completely fully integrated. And this is what I think that is the key part for us. We have yet another challenge. It's the challenge of doing what you're doing, but then adding the additional work that we need to do. So our financial clients, we provide them with healthcare. We provide their families with healthcare. Well, one thing is to be part of this whole infrastructure for healthcare. The other one is the full infrastructure for financial services. How do we get ahead? And how do we prepare them on education so they don't get over in debt on one side and they know what we. So for that, we're going to need technology. We cannot have an army anymore to support that. And that's the thing that I think we need to do. So at the program, we've really been very aggressive on data and technology, and we're doing it both at the same time. I'm not going to wait for the infrastructure to be in place to then delve into data. We're doing it at the same time just because I feel that if we were to do it sequential, by the time I finish with the infrastructure, I would have to start all over again. So we need to do both at the same time.
You raise a really interesting point around these hybrid models and the blurring of the lines, you know, between sectors, which leads me to my next question, which is, what do NGOs look like in the next 10, 15, 20 years? Maybe, Dominic, you've been a concern for a long time. I'm sure concern looks different today than it did when you joined. What do you think it looks like down the road?
You know, I don't know, because I think there's an awful lot of disruptive theory out there. It's, you know, it's within the NGO community. as in the middle-sized NGOs are under serious threat. You either get big or go boutique, and there's nothing in between. And yet I go back to MSF's report a couple of years ago, which was titled, "Where is Everybody?" And, you know, I was in Central African Republic a couple of weeks ago, and I can tell you that the challenges of working in there means that underfunded, ignored, a handful of international NGOs, very local, a very limited local capacity in terms of international NGOs. But I think there's a real opportunity for NetHope there. You know, we are now becoming a growing force, 50 plus as you mentioned. And I think it's to connect into these global issues and come up with those solutions. And not just talk about tech, but talk about migration, talk about hunger, talk about all of these things, and to put out things. For me, the Sustainable Development Goals, I think we have to rethink or reframe them. This is a promise to the world, but it's not such a promise as a plan. And the reality is, if you look into them, they're not really goals, they're rights. It's a right to food, it's a right to education. We may not be able to call them that because 193 nations probably wouldn't have signed up. But if you think about them in those terms, you move from aspiration to obligation. And you also start to hold 194 nations accountable. And that's where the conversation starts to get interesting. And that's where, how on earth are we going to achieve this? The 3 trillion that's required to even advance some of these. But I think within that as well is the line, leaving no one behind. But beneath that is the line Ban Ki-moon came out with, which is an extraordinary ambitious statement to say we will reach the furthest behind first. Now, that's something. And that's an extraordinary statement to say. And that is the people in the Central African Republic, or the people who are trapped inside Syria. And, you know, World Humanitarian Summit came out with this statement about localization. The future is not going to be international, it's going to be local. And 20% of funding, that's the ambition to put that through. Well, I know from a concerns point of view, because we pulled out of better off countries 10 years ago when we pushed into these. Our percentage of funding that went through local partners went from something like 28% down to 15%. And the bulk of that is in Pakistan, Bangladesh, and the others. But that doesn't mean to say that shouldn't be the ambition. And I think the conversation we were having over breakfast this morning is the kind of tyranny of these big objectives. The principle of them is right, but how do you build the capacity and the financial capacity? How do you bring in the level of change that's required? It's not about shoving money into a small organisation that actually can't meet the donor demands. Because on the one hand, the donors are saying, we support you going into Chad, we support you going into Central African Republic. Oh, but by the way, our risk appetite is 0. And if you screw up, you're going to pay us back. And I think the private sector there has a much bigger risk appetite. I mean, you know, we had a grant from Gates, and they said, we don't want that to go in over your overseas people. We want that in your strategy and learning unit, because these people are prepared to fail, and you have to build in failure. And we were going, we don't like failure. And we're not hardwired for failure. We're hardwired for success for donors and for the public. But it was a real learning curve for concern about saying, we now have a grant of 45 million, and apparently we're allowed to fail. Which I still struggle with, actually. But I think this is, I do think it's back to your comment about the private sector. I think these are going to be the ones that are going to come in, because the donor community 20 years ago would have been giving you an innovation grant and say, go off and start. That doesn't exist anymore. But your answer, the role is not just about the either or, the role is about complementarity between international NGOs, private sector, and national NGOs, and whatever. That, for the challenge ahead, is forward looking.
That's very helpful. And yesterday we had a fail fest where a number of organizations shared examples of projects that they had tried and failed. And one of the organizations stood up and talked about almost losing like 3 or 4 million euros, and there was an audible gasp in the room. So I think some folks might have had a heart attack when you said 45 million. Probably put some folks on the floor. Patrick, I mean, you know, the question of how you do these types of things in hybrid environments, you're already working with a difficult set of countries, trying to do integrated development and not single focus issues, which further complicates that. Add in the complication of working with USAID, which you guys do a lot, and the private sector. How do leaders today manage that level of complexity? And does it help the work that you're doing, or does it add to the difficulty of achieving the goals that FHI sets out for itself?
Yeah, it's whether it's it's difficult, but it's necessary. First, I want to say about the Fail Fast. I love the Fail Fast, and all 4 of the case studies that were presented. I've experienced all 4 of those, so I really related to it. We are, and most international nonprofits are sophisticated. They must be sophisticated multinational organizations. So we recognize that, we embrace that. We know that in order for us to be effective, to establish the relationships and the networks that we need to have in place to do the work that we're doing, and to really add value, that we've got to have sophisticated systems. We've got to have a global viewpoint. We talk about ourselves in terms of being a global actor. So we don't see ourselves as a project implementer, because we put huge amounts of energy and resources into thought leadership. So not just doing something, not just using knowledge, but actually creating knowledge and sharing knowledge. We also view ourselves as a social enterprise. And again, to be a global social enterprise requires sophisticated systems, both in terms on the internal systems, like to manage our finances. We have over 100 different funders. So, and they all have very different requirements. To have a financial system that can comply with those kinds of requirements, to have HR systems that are knowledgeable about and to operate across 60 different labor countries with 60 different labor laws, and to know how to do that. That is a value proposition in itself that often goes unrecognized. Now, can I say a word about like the future, where I see the future going? Because what we're seeing is this rapidly changing world. So we all talk about how the world is rapidly changing. And it's driven, in our view, by population growth, by urbanization, by these mega trends like climate change. And all of that gets accelerated like gasoline on a fire by technology. And that, it enables and it both creates opportunities and it poses challenges. What we're seeing in the world, and then you see other trends like private financing. You mentioned now official development assistance is only about 10% of total financing for development, where 25 years ago it was 80%. Now remittances are 3.5 times more than official development assistance. Not to mention financial flows from banks and equity markets and so forth. And that's accelerating. So what we see is that there is a bifurcation taking place in the world. And it gets to a point that you made, that there are countries that are growth markets. And in those growth markets, much of East and Southern Africa fall into that category. Much of South Asia and Southeast Asia fall into that category. those are countries, they may still have lots of problems, they may have huge human development challenges, they may not be well governed, but they're stable enough that their economies are growing, they're attracting this private investment that's fueling enterprise, both just commercial enterprise, but also social enterprise, and we see that as a major trend. And together, those growth economies, we expect that local organizations and businesses, whether it's a social enterprise or just a straight commercial enterprise, will meet human development needs. That doesn't mean there's no role for an organization like ours, because we're important in terms of technology transfer, bringing new ideas, working on problem definition and solving problems. So there's definitely a role. But that role in the growth economies we see as changing, and as those economies, as they've grown a tremendous amount of capacity. I've been working I first started working in Southern Africa in 1980, and when I compare the level of capacity of local organizations and people, the human capital in Africa to now to where it was, it's just completely different. So it just makes sense, and it is right, and it's desirable for that capacity to take more and more responsibility. And we see ourselves as seeking to enable and move that forward. But the other side of this divide are the countries that are mired in crisis. Because especially in the last 10 years, we've seen more crisis grow than shrink. You have more refugees and internally displaced people now, I think, than probably ever used to say since World War II. It may be more than in World War II now. So you have these countries that are caught in crisis. They're fragile states. They're very poorly governed, and so they don't attract the private investment. And if you look at where, there's all this talk about the private flows of capital to finance development. If you look at where that money is going, it's not going to DRC. It's not going to the Central African Republic. It's not going to Syria. And in those countries, we see a different sort of role for an international development organization like ourselves, which is more like the kind of traditional role that's combining program design, program implementation, capacity building, and providing a whole package of services, everything from fiscal accountability to procurement, because you don't have the capacity in those countries, and there are real constraints to the ability of local organizations to even exist, let alone meet these urgent emergency needs. So what we're seeing, and our organization is restructuring itself, has been restructuring itself to respond to this world, is two pretty distinct business models. One which targets growth economies, and one which targets countries that are mired in crisis. And we try to do a lot of sharing. It's not that there's no overlap or opportunities to share, but they're different business models. They require different organizational structures, different use of technology.
And actually, if I can just build on this a little bit. So we see that in financial inclusion, for example, we see that growth in economies, you see dynamic microfinance, you see financial inclusion, you see new products moving on in terms of new financial services coming up. Where you see countries that are mired in crisis is where you need to look into programs that are based on transfer of assets, on intensive education, and it's a completely different type of projects. And those are communities that do not qualify for a $50 loan. So then you do not attract the philanthropic capital that is interested on creating funds that are larger, and you also don't attract your private capital. So there is a difference on how we need to address these things. But I also see that in the future, there is a space for alliances, for us to be smarter in how we go about it. There's an incredible amount of redundancy in what we do. I don't meant to do what Mary Stoke is doing in Bolivia. We sit down and we should work together, right? So there is a lot of space for us, but also I think that especially on the growth economies, large NGOs play a big role as a catalytic to bring private money in private solutions, private methodologies, processes, the structure that sometimes is not quite there to solve social problems. And that is one of the things that we're considering. For example, in Mexico, there is space for us to not necessarily us deliver all the health care that we do for about 60,000 families, but to hire on startups, social enterprise that are very committed, that have come up. They're small, they're nimble, they're smart. They are also fully innovative and very aligned to what that patient needs, and then we can foster that market. So it's fostering ecosystems that would work. So from that perspective, we can take a step back, we can provide them with volumes, because of course we have a larger presence, we provide them with our brand, we provide them with capital, and then we create a foster of having this industry coming out. So that's what we're seeing on the financial industry, we're seeing this on the healthcare, and we're seeing those on the digital education as well. So there's a lot of models that we don't have to reinvent the wheel in a big scale over and over and over, especially in Latin America. A lot of the philanthropic capital has moved on from Latin America, especially because a lot of the countries are considered low income. So it's very hard to come up with funders that will say, oh yes, we want to work on Latin America in larger scale. So we need to be creative and we need to find different alternatives. But at the same time, we need to understand that there's a part of us too that just because we know how to do it and what we've been doing, it's the only thing we've been doing, we need to also move from our comfort zone and say, okay, what is needed to be done, and then move on. The problems have changed, and sometimes we have not adjusted and adapted to that. So sometimes we keep delivering the same answer for old problems when they're no longer there. So we need to be very smart about this.
And just one point that maybe to add to that, I think if you look back on the Haiti earthquake, massive crisis, there was something like 70 million of goods in kind that were flown into the airport that kind of sat there. Nobody had ordered them, they weren't really needed, and nobody really knew what to do with them. So when there is a crisis like that, the good intentions are massive and they have to be channeled. And the Clinton Global Initiative had this Haiti Action Network. Dan is here, I think, from Accenture, he was part of that. And it was led by an Irish millionaire, Dennis O'Brien. But it was corporate led, and it met every 6 weeks. And it didn't meet in New York, it met in Port-au-Prince. And it set up this space for discussion. Because we talk about this in Central African Republic and Syria, and you go, impossible. How are you actually going to do anything? But even within the earthquake, what this did is it changed the conversation. So you had local government, you had the UN, and the UN is not a great at country level. It's kind of very process driven, as we know. So this set up a parallel structure, or I would say a complementary structure. And you had people like, okay, you had Champagne and Dr. Karen wanted to come in with this, but they felt alienated from our language. And they went into the space where they said, you're going to be treated with respect, you're bringing in certain things. And every 6 weeks, everybody was held to account. It was a very business-like model. And there was something like 450 million generated over that period. But I think that's what we need to look at. Because it's at that level that the solutions start. But it is about somebody, and even NetHope could have a role within that and say, how do you go in and change the conversation? Not just here in Vancouver or wherever, but actually you bring it down because it's the water cooler.
Very much so.
And I think it's something that we need to replicate.
It's been interesting, and we'll hear some more about it in the course of the week. We have 8 or 9 member organizations that are working in Puerto Rico, and so we went down to help coordinate some of the connectivity, and a lot of organizations work together in emergency response. But it's been really fascinating, as many of our corporate partners and our responding organizations, given the state of affairs down there. Everybody's sharing space in 3 houses, and when you put everybody together for a couple of days, and then you have to go, set up sites and figure out where you get water and how we deal with the share power on the generator. It's been very interesting to hear some of the conversations that are coming out of there and the work that's getting done and the efficacy with which that's being worked and that our members can get back up and running. And frankly, FEMA and the government of Puerto Rico. But be that as it may. You'll hear more about that this week. And Frank, that was a commercial for you and Isaac for later this week. Let me ask one question in closing. What worries you? What keeps you up at night in thinking about the next 3 to 5 years? How do you think about sort of where the pitfalls are, and what should we keep in mind as we look forward in terms of planning? And as we spend the rest of the week here together, what are the things that keep you up at night?
I think compliance is a huge issue. The lack of available kind of supporters, donors, whatever on the risk appetite. But I think indifference, actually. I think it was George Bernard Shaw said that the opposite of inhumanity is not hate, it's indifference. So the opportunity for us is to tell the story better. And all the things that we, people often say, you go into crisis countries and you look for problems, but actually you come out and you get potential. All of the things that we're doing have the power to transform and make huge changes. But I think we've got to get the evidence, the data, and the stories out there and push that at a policy level. That to me is the opportunity.
Relevance. I do worry about sometimes us becoming just a big organization that thinks about ourselves and trying to be a hammer and sees everything as a nail. And I do believe that it's with data, it's with humility, and with completely focused on the client. We need to be client-centric to understand what the problem is. And if we don't know how to answer that question, we need to bring alliances. And that takes a lot of humility. And I think that it concerns me constantly about this thing and say, okay, we're here, and it becomes we're here for ourselves. And we should not be here in 20 years, in 10 years, in 5 years. We should all be doing something else, because I think that we achieve what we are supposed to be doing. But we really need to really take that seriously and not just say that because it sounds great. And I think that relevance for us is something that we're working very hard and being brave to recognize that, okay, we've done it, now we have to move on into something else. That takes a lot of that.
I heard a tech leader recently at a conference make a statement about international development and international development organizations. And he said, if you devise a solution and it doesn't work, then you failed. In other words, you guys have been, working on these problems forever, and you're coming up with solutions, but your solutions, there's still poverty, there's still human development challenges. So that's evidence that your solutions don't work. And when he first said it, I wrote it down and I thought, yeah, that's something worth thinking about. And then as I thought about it, I thought that's completely wrong. That's like a distorted view of history. That these big trends I mentioned, those are humanity is going to face human development challenges. That's part of our society and our lot in life, our existence. And I think we need to be careful. The tech world has influenced so dramatically the way not only we think about development challenges, but the way we think about life and how we relate to people. And that we need to be careful in not taking what works in a particular sector, like how tech can scale. You know, it comes up a lot in scaling and sustainability. You're not scalable, you're not sustainable. Therefore, you're not adding value. Because in our industry, the only way that value is added is if you're scalable and quickly scalable and sustainable. That we need to be careful about. Well, one, we need to learn what we can, recognize, you know, that there is a point there that we need to pay attention to, but also understand where the differences are. So the thing that keeps me up at night, I mean, there's all sorts of organizational and operational challenges that we face. We're a big organization. So, you know, I can dine on those whenever I want. What keeps me up at night are the bigger trends happening in our world. Is the rise of populism, the anti-immigrant sentiment, the misogyny that I see, the racism. I mean, I think a lot of this stuff, if we're honest with ourselves, and we're not, comes down to racism, the rise in the U.S., the rise of white supremacy, and in Europe, the rise of neo-Nazism. Those are the things that keep me up at night, and those are the things that I think we as a sector have a deep responsibility to address, and that to some extent we're not equipped to address. I mean, I feel, I'll talk for myself, I really feel like we, FHI 360, should be doing something about the rise of racism and white supremacy in the U.S., because we operate in the U.S. How we do that, we're not really equipped to do that, but we're a human development organization, and I think human development organizations, businesses as well, need to address these big, malign trends that we're seeing in our world.
I think really underscores the.
Can I add? So to racism, to all this whole situation of what we see in the U.S. today, the anti-immigrant sentiment, I'm going to add misogynism. So for that, as we've seen, there is an incredible amount of misogyny. I think these issues were always there. They're now being more transparent or coming up, and they come in waves. Sometimes we face them. I mean, the U.S. in the 60s faced racism, and look where we are again. But I do want to call out misogynism. There is half of a planet. It's a half of the population of this planet that goes through misogynism on a daily basis. Enough is enough. So I'm just going to bring that up as well. I absolutely agree. I think that we need to have a voice. I also think that there's incredible organizations working in the U.S. against racism, and this is a moment for us to align with them. So that way we don't reinvent the wheel and we are moving faster. But the issues in the region where I operate, we haven't seen the racism to this level yet. It's probably because it hasn't come back yet. So we have to learn to prepare for the next region. But I do, it's just my job. I would be remiss if I didn't manage to bring in the word misogynism when you talk about racism and anti-immigrant feelings.
Thank you. I want to thank all three of you for sharing your thoughts with us. This was incredibly interesting, and I think in having multiple rounds of applause throughout the panel, you struck a nerve, and it really brought up a number of things that resonate with all of us. And that context for us as we think about the work that we do inside NetHope is incredibly important, because it's not about the technology, it's about the impact that we can have and what we can enable. So thank you for sharing those thoughts with us and giving us your perspective. So give him a round of applause and welcome. Chris is has a very good, very strange title, the head of Spectrum Policy and Global Connectivity for Facebook. But let me put that in a little bit of context in that Chris has been responsible for shaping Facebook's policies and work in expanding connectivity around the world for the last several years. He's been a huge partner. Facebook has been a significant partner. Chris has been one of our primary points of contact in a lot of the work that we've done with the company over the last couple of years. And of course, many of you know Corey. Corey is with General Atlantic and has been a NetHope board member for many years. I'm going to leave it to them to see where this conversation will take us, but thank you both for joining us this morning.
Great, thank you, Lauren. So I would say it's great to see some familiar faces. We can't actually see anyone that's out there. So yeah, Chris, first, thanks for joining. Thanks for joining us up here today. I was doing a little background reading, and when I was reading about the connectivity efforts at Facebook, I was reading about drones and laser scientists and all sorts of things. So everyone knows Facebook is a social media network, but why don't you start by just kind of explaining the connectivity challenge and how Facebook is digging into solving that?
Yeah, that sounds great. So let me start by thanking NetHope for inviting me to participate in this year's summit. I'm both honored and humbled to be among you. I've had enough interaction with the international aid community, much of it through NetHope, to understand the amazing work that's being done by everyone in this room. So happy to participate in that to the extent that Facebook has a small role to play in this. So Corey, to answer your question on the connectivity front, and this really is the thing that I spend the most time on at Facebook. The reason why it's important to us is that it really goes to the heart of the mission of the company. The mission of the company is to build community and to bring people closer together. And of course, it really starts with connectivity. So as a tech company, a few years back, we took a look at this sort of broader issue of what is the state of global connectivity. And today, almost 25 years after the launch of the consumer web, and companies like Netscape and Mosaic and AOL and Yahoo and all those early guys, 3.5 billion people are online, which is great. But what's really surprising is that 4 billion people are still not online. And that rate of internet penetration growth has been slowing. So we think the first 3.5 billion were the easy ones. And to get the last 4 billion people online, it's going to take sort of the right mix of policies as well as more innovative technology to bring people online. So one of the things we did was we founded a group within Facebook's infrastructure team, a group that continues to build out data centers around the world. And they are focused on new access technologies, as well as developing new network architectures that we think will lead to more pervasive network coverage and more affordable connectivity. And so I spend a lot of time supporting that team. Networks around the world, as everyone knows, are getting more and more wireless, not just the last mile from your device to the cell tower, but also sort of as you work back in the network, microwave links and other wireless technologies. So some of what I spend time on is how do we manage the airwaves to make it easier to get people online.
Last night you mentioned briefly that it's not actually sort of a group within Facebook, that it's pervasive, that it's sort of organized in the fabric of the company.
That's right. So when I joined the company back in 2012, there were dedicated mobile teams, so mobile partnerships, mobile product, mobile engineering, and then just a couple of years later, everybody's job was mobile. And similarly, when we announced sort of our global initiative called Internet.org, it was small and dedicated teams sort of working on this long-term effort towards internet connectivity. And today, a few years later, it really is part of everyone's job.
That's great. Give us a sense of where it stacks up in the overall priority list. If you went into Mark Zuckerberg's office, would he be talking about this?
It's a high priority. So one of the things that I really like about the company is that it takes a very long-term view of its mission. And we have a young founder CEO who's been there for, by definition, the beginning of the company, but it's been 13 years, and he's 33 years old, and he takes a very long-term view. So it's extremely important, and Mark, as well as sort of many people on his senior team, sort of can very quickly move from reviewing products and features and services day to day to then thinking about how we can plan out 5, 10 years. So it's a priority, and it's always sort of, and a lot of these tech projects take time, particularly if if they're enabled in part by policymakers embracing those approaches.
Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about what you see as some of the applications, both of the connectivity and of the platform, maybe some of the success stories that you resonate with.
Sure. So, you know, our connectivity strategy tends to be comprehensive in approach. So, covering technology we're developing, programs that we're developing, and then partnerships. We also, you know, openness is a real hallmark of how we approach things. We think we can move faster by engaging a broader group of stakeholders. And so we tend to be pretty open with our plans, as well as open with our technology. So Facebook, years ago, was looking at the sort of computing needs of the business, and we didn't see server technology and data centers moving fast enough to meet our computing needs. And so we fundamentally took a look at how those products and facilities were designed. We came up with our own design. We put it in this foundation called the Open Compute Project. And today, hundreds of companies are adopting those designs. All the server companies are now building to an open compute spec. And we're taking a similar approach now to last mile connectivity infrastructure. We founded something along with a number of other partners called the Telecom Infra Project about 2 years ago at the big mobile conference in Barcelona. And today there are about 500 members. And we're fundamentally looking at the radio access network, the backhaul network, and the core network and how they're managed with an eye towards lower CapEx, lower OpEx, again, to get people connected faster.
And Chris, even if you sort of go up a notch and talk about the application level a little bit too, you know, it's not your main area of focus.
Sure.
I'm sure you're familiar with it. Cite a few examples of kind of success stories there as well.
Yeah, so let me put it in the crisis context. So, you know, it really, the approach for us starts with connectivity. And it starts with connectivity because of this sort of inherent need for people to connect to family and friends. Later on in the crisis, and that gets even more intensified. So one of the things that it led us to do was create a service called Safety Check. And this was really born originally out of the earthquakes and the typhoons in Japan years ago. And we had some Facebook engineers based in Japan who were desperate to connect with family and friends. And that really spawned that initial idea that we need to build this into our platform. And so today, you know, working with some international crisis bodies who designate something as a crisis, they give that crisis a name. We start looking at how Facebook users are interacting in that area, and then we activate Safety Check. And today, it's been activated 600 times, and over 1 billion interactions have occurred among friends and family for people trying to understand who's safe, who's not, and account for people. So I think Safety Check is
amazing. I mean, there aren't too many projects you can cite 1 billion users for, so yeah, that's a great example. Yeah. Talk a little bit about some of the challenges. You know, you're building out connectivity, you're dealing with governments all around the world, different broken partners. It's such a large problem. Sort of where do you start with something like that?
So, you know, if the question is, one challenge, so physical world, digital world, there are bad actors out there. You know, these are actors that would likely do harm to people, to their communities. And because we run a large online community, we have an enormous sense of responsibility to make our platform as safe as possible, to make sure that bad actors can't do things on the platform. And so we continue to commit significant resources to make it better. You know, I think in general, we would say that the good that comes from connecting people and the information that people can get, the better health outcomes, the better educational resources, you know, the sort of job opportunities, and just basic information about what's going on around them, obviously far outweighs some of the bad.
Yeah, for sure. Shifting gears a little, NetHope's been a partner with Facebook for a while. NetHope is itself going through an evolution. So I'd love to hear you just talk a little bit about the partnership and sort of what Facebook sees in NetHope.
You bet. So the Facebook NetHope
when the Ebola crisis was happening in West Africa. And again, it goes back to our CEO who cares a lot about what's happening in the world and believes that Facebook should have a role in some cases to try to resolve those situations. So when the Ebola crisis started, Mark and his wife made a donation to CDC, and that put them in touch with people on the ground in West Africa. And he came back to the company and said, look, we've done something personally, but the company needs to have a company response. And connectivity should be part of that response. Connectivity for Ebola workers. And so I raised my hand and said, I'll run with the connectivity piece, and there were other colleagues that were managing other aspects.
And did you go to Africa at this point?
Did actually. So there were 3 of us that went to Accra, Ghana, which was a good place to go because it was close to the Ebola zone, and it's where a lot of the actors were sort of gathering, convening to coordinate and collaborate and logistically move things in and out of the zone. And the UN has one of their humanitarian response depots there. And so we showed up over there, and we had a plan sketched out, and plugged in with the UN ETC group, saying, hey, look, sort of humbly, like, I'm sure there's a lot of plans going on and competing, but we're happy to sort of dovetail in with whatever is being managed here. And they ended up really embracing the things that we laid out. And I think the fact that we were there actually was meaningful. And so that's how it all started. But one of the things that we were able to do while we were there was get the mobile operators in the 3 Ebola countries to provide us the long lats of their cell site locations, which is something that operators normally hold on to pretty dearly. And we were able to feed that into a mapping tool to understand the supply side of connectivity, as well as where their networks were down. And then what we really needed to illuminate was the demand side of connectivity. And that's really where we met NetHope, because I think it was a combination of USAID and NetHope that were providing most of those inputs for us to understand where the Ebola treatment units and the community care clinics were, as well as the NGO operational hubs. And so feeding that into the same tool, we could then see the demand side of connectivity with the supply side, see the gaps.
Yep.
And essentially we started designing and building a network to fill those gaps. And I think the reason that Mark really wanted connectivity to be a piece of that solution, and his wife is a doctor, it was to help other health workers make the courageous decision to go to West Africa to help contribute to the resolving the crisis. Made easier by the fact that not only would connectivity help them do their jobs, but would allow them to stay in touch with loved ones back at home. So that was a piece of it, and then there were other things that we did. But that was our first interaction with NetHope, and it was, things just happened very seamlessly from the beginning. We seemed to speak the same language. They moved at a very fast pace, and we move at a fast pace. They understood technology. I think a lot of the leadership, as you know, comes from the tech industry. And so culturally, there was a good fit there, and great communicators, common mission, bringing different things to the table.
Has it become one of the organizations you see yourself working more and more with?
I would say so. I mean, we've got a little bit of a track record now of working together. It started in West Africa with Ebola, but then more recently it was providing connectivity to refugees in Greece. And currently we're working with NetHope on the connectivity response in Puerto Rico.
I'm curious, one of the things the other kind of NetHope partners often say is that their partnership with NetHope is valuable to the employee base as well, and I'm curious if you've seen any hints of that.
Absolutely. It's hugely important. So when Mark, the way he typically communicates is he'll post something, and that gets picked up, and he has a lot of followers on Facebook. And when the employees saw that, there was just this outpouring of interest to get involved. And we are a very mission-driven company. We tend to have a lot of very sort of mission-driven and sort of purpose-driven people. And so, I remember one of the first meetings after that post that he made where, we had this conference room that was just overflowing with people trying to understand the contours of what we would contribute to this and how they could help. And so, yeah, it's very important to the employee base, because a lot of times, as a company, we spend time on, how do we connect people? And we don't often discuss the why, in large part because, I think we don't get too many arguments against the social and economic benefits of connectivity. But, it's times like this where the why gets really accentuated and people really get sort of emotionally involved.
That's great. Say a little bit about sort of how the NGOs in the room might take better advantage of the platform, things that they could be trying out or ways they could work with you.
Yeah. One way to answer that is just to kind of walk through a little bit some of the things that we're doing with NetHope in the current hurricane response. So, I guess Facebook's support is across a couple different flavors. We provided some level of funding. Number two, we are providing some mapping, some data that helps inform the state of connectivity. We can kind of look at the Facebook population, where they're connecting, how that changes over time. That illuminates sort of the state of connectivity. We have a information as aid component to what we're doing with NetHope, where we've donated a certain dollar amount for ad credits. And the idea there is to, as people get connected, that you can deliver very targeted messages to people to help them address some of the issues that they're facing tied to the crisis. So how to find help on certain things, how to find safe, to be safe, how to avoid waterborne illnesses, how to look for symptoms of those illnesses and what to do if you see them. So it could be any number of things, but that info as aid piece I think is pretty important and something that I think will continue to evolve over time. And then I think, we're providing some employees to participate in the actual connectivity response. So we had one of our guys embedded with the initial assessment team. We've got others going right now. And so we'll continue to participate in that. And, if operators are sharing data about their networks and need help getting back online, we have some tools that our teams use as we think about deploying networks that helps to identify the right locations for establishing line of sight microwave links and other things to aid in network deployment. So we're really just sort of I think getting started in this. There's some obvious areas, and some of that is contained in what I just described. But I think as it's great that NetHope is establishing I got to get the name right, the Center for the Digital Nonprofit, and as that continues to take shape and evolve, I think we'd love to stay close to it to look for ways that we can collaborate and support that.
It's great, and that actually sort of ties into my last question, which is step away from Facebook a little bit and just give your own 2 cents on sort of how you see NGOs going through this digital transformation, and do you see ones that are sort of beacons out there in front that are able to really do this, and a little bit of a sense of where you think most of the industry is in this transition?
Yeah. So we have various teams within Facebook that have some direct interaction with NGOs. A lot of my interaction has been directly with NetHope. And that's been very purposeful in that, NetHope has been and continues to be this leverage point for us to have a bigger impact. So I think, the fact that NetHope, the role that it plays, the leadership that it continues to play with this new center makes a ton of sense. So for us, I think that it'll be the starting point. That's not to say we wouldn't work directly with any NGO, but I think as we get started in continuing to refine the things that we can do together, we'll look for those leverage points.
That's great. Yeah, terrific. Thank you, Chris. That's a perfect ending. Great lead into Lauren.
Thanks.
Yeah.
That was great, guys. Thanks very much.
Yep.
Thank both of the has been core to what NetHope has done for many, many years, and is obviously quite important in terms of how we think about the digital nonprofit and the foundation that connectivity creates for the work that we will do in the future. I want to spend just a few minutes talking a little bit about the Center for the Digital Nonprofit. And you've probably heard that 100 times so far this morning. I'm going to see if I can get in another 100 plugs for the Center for the Digital Nonprofit, and actually spend some time, a few minutes talking about sort of what the center will actually do, why we have gotten to the point of launching the center today and opening the center today, and how we think that the center will evolve to support our member organizations. There's a real sense that we are at an inflection point, and completely unpopular. I've heard that a couple of times actually this morning, that we are at this point where so many things seem to be at just the right moment, that if they would come together, then we would actually change the way that the sector could work together, the way that the sector could achieve impact. And so when we think about that point, it's important to recognize that's where we are. One of my all-time favorite quotes, and I totally forgot who said it, was, when opportunity knocks, don't shut the door. And at some level, I feel like we're at this really interesting point where there is this opportunity for us to go and accelerate the work that we're doing and have a greater impact and help our organizations make meaningful progress towards their missions. The World Economic Forum estimates $100 trillion worth of net new value will be created in the global economy by 2030. That is not a typo. It's $100 trillion. That's new. That comes both through dollars that are saved because of greater efficiency in the way that we work, of greater economic opportunity that is created through digital transformation, free time that is freed up. I mean, it's a pretty big number, and to be fair, it's probably padded. So let's say that it's only half that much, 50 trillion. Still a lot of money. And the challenge is that we, as a sector, are not particularly well positioned to take advantage of any of it. There are no nonprofit dollars actually accounted for in that number. And that's a problem, because we know that the needs in the global economy, the needs in the communities in which we work, are far greater than what we have dollars to address. There are, 1.6 billion people living in poverty. Half of the communities in some places are unemployed. We've seen 65 million refugees and displaced people over the last couple of years. I'm sure that number is higher. 30% of middle-income jobs will be displaced by automation by 2025. Those are huge challenges for us to address, and we as a global community, and we in this sector in particular. And so some of that 50 trillion would be nice to have to address that. If we think about the Sustainable Development Goals, the UNEP suggests that we're about somewhere between $5 and $6 trillion a year short of being able to address those goals if we continue to work the way that we have traditionally worked. And so I think it's safe to say that the way that we have approached these problems in the past isn't going to work. We just can't add another dollar and get another unit of outcome. Add another dollar, because those dollars are going to run out. And so we have to think about this differently. We believe, and I think all of us in this room believe, that a digital strategy can help bridge that gap. It can help us radically think differently in a very radical way about how we not only develop aid, but how we deliver it, about how we scale the impact that we have, and about how we work with one another, how we work with the communities that we serve, how we work with partners. How do we know this? What might give us some indication that that kind of scale might be reached? Well, if you think about the companies that have grown most dramatically in the last decade, they are all companies that are built on platforms. If you think about the history of computing, and I promise not to do a history of computing lesson for too long, it started with mainframes, and it was one computer to lots of different people. And then we went to the network environment, and we could talk to everybody in our office. How many people, you can raise your hand, I actually won't be able to see you, but how many people remember when you no longer had to take the floppy out of your PC to take it over to the one that had a printer attached to it, right? It was crazy when all of a sudden you could print from your own PC. And then we had mobile, right? And then we had, and then you had not only one device, sometimes you had 2 devices or 3 devices or 5 devices. And now we've moved past all that, and now we're well into social and now into the cloud. And we're rather than being our relationship being one person to one device or one person to 3 or 4 devices, it's all of us with the relationship to one another, and that is enabled by platforms. That kind of scale and that kind of impact doesn't happen when you're looking at a 1-to-1 ratio, right, or a 1-to-few ratio. It really is platforms that have enabled the way that these companies have scaled and give us hope that we too can bridge that gap by looking at platforms, by looking at these technologies in order to take advantage of what we know can happen in the space that is so relevant to us. But what is a digital nonprofit? We've used that phrase a lot this morning. What do we mean when we say the digital nonprofit? Well, we mean a couple of things. One, digital nonprofits leverage technology well. We talk a lot about the impact that technology has, but let's just recognize that you can't be a digital nonprofit without using technology well. But that's not where it stops. We also have to think about what does that technology enable us to do? And not only what does it enable us to do in terms of the impact that we can have, but the relationship that we can have with the people that we serve. I'm not even sure I know how to back up, but if you think about the relationships that these types of platforms enable, I'm no longer working through something else. I'm working directly with some guy, some woman, some family that's going to let me come in and stay in their guest bedroom because the hotel was booked. I'm going to work directly with someone who has a car so that I can get from point A to point B. It enables that kind of interaction between folks. And a digital nonprofit also gives us the opportunity to think about how do we work directly with the beneficiaries that we seek to serve, and how do we work more closely with our partners across the sector. And a digital nonprofit delivers unique and integrated business capabilities. You heard Patrick talk about this morning about how do we connect the work that we do on the back office with the work that we do in the programs team and bring it all together to a comprehensive and cohesive whole. That is a struggle for every organization, frankly, in our sector and in the private sector. But it's one of the ways that we can learn from the private sector, and frankly probably learn together. And then we can supplement that by being nimble and being adaptive, by using the data that we have around the way that we work and the impact that we have in order to make sure that what we are offering is relevant and it's integrated across the business. So if we work from that definition, we wanted to know, okay, to what extent then are NetHope member organizations actually adopting digital strategies? And to put it in context, again, let's give some space for some rounding errors. NetHope member organizations probably spend somewhere between $400 and $600 million a year on technology. Let's say I'm off again by a factor of 50%. That's still $200 to $400 million. That's a lot of money. That's a huge market presence. If that's true, then surely we're really embracing digital. Right? We're really diving in there, and we know exactly what we're doing. The reality is only 24% of us have what we ourselves would identify as a digital strategy. We're just not doing it. There's lots of reasons for that. But in a world where we start from the position that we believe that technology can have an impact, where we have a huge goal in front of us, and where presumably there are at least some resources for us to go and do this, we haven't quite cracked the nut on how to bring a digital strategy into our organizations. Of the work that we are doing, 60% of the tech projects that we do are primarily focused on operational efficiency or connecting our internal offices better. Only 15% of the investments that we're doing are directly related to program improvement. Again, lots of reasons for that, but that's a huge opportunity for us to make some progress. What was perhaps most surprising in that conversation is that we're the problem. It's us. I fully expected when we talked to members that what we would hear was, we would love to do this, and boy, we're ready to do it, and we've got a plan, and if we just had some funding to, some capability to go and do this, we would dive right in. Funding wasn't what we heard from member organizations that was the barrier. In fact, of the 5 things that people told us were barriers, it was number 4. Didn't even make the top 3. The top 3 were organizational structure. How quickly can our organizations move? We've heard lots of references this morning to our organizations that are siloed, and how do we connect those? Those silos create real barriers to us being able to make progress against opportunities that sit in front of us. Organizational structure was the number 1 answer. 32% of folks that we surveyed actually said that organizational structure was the challenge. The second big challenge was organizational and leadership support. And that came both at the senior leadership level, which was, it was unclear what the agenda was, or it wasn't clear that there was support at the senior leadership level, and that middle management support was weak. And maybe it would exist, but when your partner on another side of the business changed roles, that support would evaporate. And statistically, if you believe what the management consultants tell us, most digital transformation projects actually fail at the middle management level. That's where the problem is, right? Is getting the critical pieces to keep moving in the same direction. And then the third big barrier that we had was our own capabilities. What our staff had, our digital skills that we had available to us, so that when we developed new projects, when we developed new products that we needed to land and we wanted to push forward, we didn't have the capability to sustain it from a staff capability perspective. And then funding. Although I will tell you that in casual conversation, funding is always the number 1 answer, every single solitary time. And I don't doubt that it is a significant barrier. We run into it at NetHope, right? In nonprofit accounting, you want to watch my husband pull his hair out, trying to explain to him the difference between restricted and unrestricted and temp restricted, and yeah, he's just like, why can't you just spend money? And I'm like, yeah, that's a great question. It just doesn't work that way in this sector. And so I don't doubt that funding is a question, but I was impressed and somewhat worried by the number of answers that came back that weren't directly related to funding. It wasn't funding and, it was other things and funding. And so that got us thinking about, okay, if those are the big challenges that we're facing, what do we need to do, right? How do we get past that? How do we get past that in a world where we are mission-driven organizations, right? We feel passionately about whatever it is our respective organizations are trying to achieve, and we feel passionately about the kinds of tools that we could apply against those problems in order to make progress. So what do we have to do? I would argue that we need to think about things in a radically different way. We really need to think about radical change. And I don't mean blowing up all of our organizations and starting over. But I mean really taking a step back and saying, what is it that will drive us to make the investments in the types of efforts that could lead to exponential increases in our ability to deliver against the needs in the communities in which we work? And we have to do it quickly. We have to do it quickly because we have to learn to be more agile. Well, it's great to spend several years planning a 5-year project. That's 10 years down the road. The world that we're working in today is going to change, and the pace of change in the technology sector, the pace of change because of communications and working with communities in need, all of that forces us to be more agile and to respond more quickly. The only way that's going to happen is through collaboration and cooperation. The only time you ever see any industry, any sector, make exponential change is when they get together to go solve a problem. I don't remember the details. Someone will remember the details. But everybody's heard the story about when we were laying railroads all across the country and the gauges didn't line up, right? We didn't really get to cross-country shipping and the ability to have big distribution networks until we finally got together and said, let's just pick one size. I spoke yesterday about the growth of ATMs. ATMs didn't proliferate until everybody got together and said, we need to agree to be able to exchange data so that we don't all have to go build ATMs everywhere around the world. We can actually we can disassociate the machines from the banks per se, or allow other banks' customers to come in and access cash through our banks. None of us would be able to communicate via email if someone hadn't agreed upon what email transfer protocols were going to look like a long time ago. So we've got to figure out what it is. We've got to figure out how we work together in order to address some of these changes, because all of us have heard and all of us have been in conversations where we are criticized, rightly or wrongly, but where we are criticized for doing the same things over and over and over again, and not learning from one another, not scaling the projects that we have. So we got to work together. We got to move more quickly. We got to think differently. But as my grandmother would say, it never makes a lot of sense to take off like a chicken with your head cut off. So where is it that we're going, right? Where is it that we're headed? Well, we spent a lot of time thinking about this. And if you look at sort of where organizations have evolved, right, where our member organizations that have embraced technology have evolved, it's a pretty predictable path. So think about NGO 1.0, right, a traditional nonprofit. Everyone remembers this nonprofit from several years ago. Most of the processes are manual. Everything is custom. We had a developer come in and create something for us that is now too difficult to upgrade. One of the things that we struggle with is that there's no data, or very limited data. Everything is a singular system. It's end to end, and we are largely constrained by what our donors want us to go and do. Right? Everybody remember that NGO? Folks remember working in those types of organizations? And we started to get out of that when we really started to look at ICT for D, right? When we started to bring technology in at the field level. And all of a sudden, you see organizations moving to a much more matrixed organization, right? We started to automate things. We started to use technology to address our HR and financial systems. We could generate donor reports because things were automated, and all of a sudden, because we had systems everywhere, now we have too much data. Now we don't know what to do with that data. Anybody ever feel like you have too much data, you just can't analyze it? Not really sure where to put it. I remember talking to one member that will remain unnamed, but I loved the fact that they talked about their blue binder problem. And all their data used to be stored in blue binders. I said, we don't have a blue binder problem anymore. Now we have an Excel file problem. We no longer have warehouses full of blue binders, but we have, in cloud storage systems full of Excel files. And projects over, they sit there for 2 or 3 years. Nobody can remember what that data was for. Probably should have integrated it somewhere. And so now what we end up with is systems that have a good technology footprint, but they're not particularly well integrated, and they don't really solve the problem that we were seeking to solve. Where we need to get to is a highly networked organizations that build on platforms and that we share data. And we share data in a way that allows us to actually know how we're doing, how our peers are doing, where there are opportunities, and how to improve the work that we're doing. When I first joined NetHope a couple of years ago, I said, gosh, do we share data? And everybody said, oh yeah, no, we have tons of open data. We publish our data everywhere. Okay. Do we publish it and share it, or do we just publish it? Oh, we publish it. People can use it whatever they want to. And we've talked in many different circles around here over the last couple of years that we often can access data, but we're not really sure what the context is. How do we get more purposeful about sharing it? How do we get more open about sharing it? How do we trust one another enough so we can share data in a way that actually allows us to learn from one another and move our organizations forward and design better programs? That is really, really hard. That's really hard, and it's very scary. That having been said, I've been very encouraged over the last couple of months in conversations with a handful of organizations who have said, we've started to do that quietly. We're going to test it. Us 2 or 3 organizations, we're going to get together and see if it'll work here. And if it works here, then we want to go and expand it. And that is great, because those are some of the hardest first steps to take. But what that allows us to do is it allows us to actually be impact driven. What is the impact that we want to have? How do we shape that impact? How do we bring beneficiaries into the conversation so that we know what they believe will help make an impact? And then all of a sudden our relationships with our donors don't just become leveraging what they have, but actually allows us to have a strategic conversation about what are we trying to achieve? What do the communities in which we work want to achieve? And how can we use what we have in order to do that? All of those, that evolution is hard. None of us are at 3.0. I don't think any of us are at 3.0. If you're 3.0, we really want to talk to you and figure out how you did that. But I don't think anybody's quite there yet. I think most of us, frankly, would probably put ourselves somewhere around 1.75 to 2 to 2.25. Now I'm getting really granular. There's probably, that's a general direction. I'm not quite sure how I'd measure 2.25, but that's probably where we'd put ourselves, right? Anybody think they'd be higher than 2.25 or 2.5? Anybody think they're 3.0? All right, so it's hard to get there. There's frankly a lot of private sector organizations that would not put themselves in a whatever the equivalent is of NGO 3.0. And all of those issues are not just technology issues, but they're issues that touch on organizational structure, they touch on business process, they touch on people capabilities, they touch on the way that we interact with our peers across those silos, how we break down those silos and get out of silos, and not get even past matrix, but actually get to deeply networked organizations so that the dependencies across the organization are not only obvious, but there are incentives for us as an organization and us as individuals to participate in that. So how do we accelerate that change? Because that change is super hard. But that's the question that we've been noodling on over the last couple of months. And I will say it's if you look back, if I look back, especially just in having talked to members over the last couple of years, it's so obvious of how we got here, right? It's so obvious how this changed from how do we access technology more effectively to, gosh, now that we have technology, you know, it's but it hasn't moved us as far down the road as we want it to be. How do we even get a little bit further? And we get to this question of digital that has mirrored the conversation in the private sector. I know we feel behind a lot of times. It was really interesting watching a presentation from one of the communication industries summits they were probably 9 months ago. I said 24% of us had digital strategy. They had only clocked in at 20%. So you're ahead of the telecom providers. That should feel pretty good because they feel digital, right? But you know, it's not that no one's really kind of figured it out, but there are certainly things that we can learn from one another. So how do we accelerate this change? How do we bring it all together? How do we address these questions of people and process and technology and allow ourselves to get from 2 to 3? Well, I am very happy to be able to say that we're kicking off this thing that we're calling the Center for the Digital Nonprofit. And we even have a new logo. Yay! The Center for the Digital Nonprofit. This brings together really about 9 months worth of hard work with many members, with many of the working groups, with the board, across the staff, conversations at every level of so many of our member organizations, to focus the work that we collectively as a sector need to do and to support individual member organizations on their path to digital transformation. So what does that mean? What does the Center for the Digital Nonprofit mean? Well, what we're really trying to do is to combine the experience of nonprofits to take what we know and know well with the expertise of the technology sector and figure out how we scale solutions that allow us to address the challenges that we all care so much about. Dominic referred to some of these questions about, what's the future of the NGO? Where does the NGO go? And, I think it's an interesting theoretical question, but the collective knowledge of the international nonprofits and how to build trust in communities, how to access communities that are in need, how to work in difficult environments, how to build multi-stakeholder partnerships in a way that benefits local communities is critically important, and we should not lose that knowledge. Sure, technology would allow us to bypass a lot of things, but then we would make a lot of mistakes along the way. And at the same time, the technology sector knows a tremendous amount about how to get to scale, how to reach people, how to engage in meaningful relationship building in order to engage in co-creation and collaboration that really benefits everyone that is participating in that community. So let's bring those together. Let's bring those together and see what we can accomplish. The center will do different things. We're going to focus on people, we're going to focus on process, and we're going to focus on technology. Those are the three big pieces that we think are relevant to digital transformation. But more than just looking at those questions and coming up with some interesting answers and some toolkits, we're going to take the resources and tools that we create as a community, that we pull together that help us think about how we address this challenge. And we're going to couple it with two really important pieces. Some guidance and some consulting. How do we really help member organizations? How do we understand from a peer-to-peer perspective, from a technology partner perspective to a member, from a NetHope staff member who's been through this to a member and back and forth again? How do we take that and actually help member organizations think about how to structure this? That was carefully selected because when we did the survey around how effective were we addressing this question of digital strategies, the number one request from members, tell me how to get started. I don't have the expertise inside my organization to know how to get started and map out a plan. So help me understand what that roadmap looks like. And then the other thing we're going to do is we're going to provide grant support. Next year-ish, we'll be kicking off a fundraising effort to raise funding to provide to member organizations to accelerate digital transformation. It is really hard, she says, preaching to the choir, to raise money for digital transformation. Especially if you're an organization that's well known for supporting refugees or sponsoring children or solving agricultural challenges, it's really hard to then go and raise funding for digital transformation. And even if you can raise the funding for the technology or for a specific project, it's very hard to raise money for the necessary change management and training and business process redesign that goes along with it that actually makes that technology come to life and have an exponential impact across the organization. So we're going to focus our work on helping member organizations access the funding in order to be able to do those types of things. Our vision in this work is to come up with a roadmap for digital nonprofits. There won't be one way to do it. There won't be 1,000 ways to do it. Somewhere in between. But we're never going to know what those are unless we start really paying attention to how are different organizations tackling this question. And are there commonalities between the way that large organizations and small organizations are tackling it? We're going to spend some time as we think about what that roadmap through digital transformation looks like. How do we bring in the voice of communities in which we work? How do underserved communities who are increasingly connected, how do they get a voice in this conversation? And then how do we leverage data for impact more effectively? Those three things, embracing this change that is so critical for our future work, engaging a broader conversation, inviting a broader community as part of this conversation, and then using data to figure out how we move forward, that is where we're going with the Center for the Digital Nonprofit. Now we're building on work that has frankly started in a lot of places. It's new, but we're also building on a legacy and already has some existing work. And as I said, we're going to talk about people, process, and technology. Those are the things that we care about. First, people, skills. If we're lacking skills, we got to know what skills it is that we're lacking across the organization. And so we've started to put together a draft framework for members to think about and see if it's relevant in their organizations as we seek to finalize it, built on expertise from lots of different sectors and research. But what does that look like, and what does that mean, and what is relevant in the NGO space? And then how do we pull together the resources so that member organizations that want to build their skills internally can do so? We're going to look at process. Many of you have been involved in the development of the NGO reference model. That is a fantastic piece of work. And now how do we make it even richer? How do we use that as a backdrop to think about how we build efficient processes and connect silos within our organization and make the most of the resources that we have? Continue to develop that. The leadership that Greg and Mike and others that have been involved in this has been tremendous, and what has come out of that is great, and we're going to continue to drive that forward. And then, of course, technology. Everybody who was in a working group yesterday knows exactly what I'm talking about. But the work that we're doing around information security and data protection and data sharing and connectivity and infrastructure and enterprise architecture and humanitarian data sharing. How do we make sure that what happens in those working groups doesn't stay in those working groups, but turns into actionable resources and tools for members? We will pull all of that together under the Center for the Digital Nonprofit. And hopefully, next year, when we come back together in a location that will be announced later this week, we'll not give it away just yet, we will be able to talk about the progress that we've made and see how the work that members have started actually comes to fruition with the year of the center under our belt. It's always exciting to start new things. It's always exciting to set up on a different path and see what's going to come of it. And one of the things that's been most encouraging about the work that we've done in getting to this point is some of the incredible conversations that we've had with many of our partners. And this has afforded us an opportunity to bring a new partner on board. And I want to welcome Erin Batto-Felter from Okta up to the stage. This is where I click the slide, who has recently come on board as one of the founding partners for the Center for the Digital Nonprofit. I want to give her an opportunity to say a few words about the work that Okta is doing.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Erin.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to Lauren. As Lauren said, I'm Erin Batto-Felter. I'm the Executive Director of Okta for Good, and I have the great pleasure of leading our company's social impact work. I am extremely proud to stand here this morning as a partner as we unveil the Center for the Digital Nonprofit, which is something that all of us at Okta are extremely excited about. So who are we? Why are we here? Why are people at Okta excited about this? I want to start by just sharing a little bit about who we are, for those of you who aren't familiar. Okta's mission is to enable any organization to connect to any technology. Sounds simple, not always the case, right, as you all know. But what does that really mean, right? So today's reality is that the cloud market is expected to reach $152 billion by the year 2020. And we all know what that means. It means millions of apps. It means many, many more connected devices. It means lots of changes for your organizations, including the people that need to access all of these tools and applications that are related to your organizations, right? It's not just employees anymore. It's partners, it's donors, it's volunteers. All these folks need to access the applications and tools from all these devices from all over the world. And I don't need to tell this room that gets quite complicated quite quickly, right? And so in this reality, integration is everything. Keeping data secure is extremely important. And so that's what we do. We are laser focused on solving this. Okta has created an identity layer that enables organizations to seamlessly and securely connect all their people to the tools that they need to do their best work. We started with two guys and an idea about 10 years ago. You'll meet one of those guys on Thursday as one of our co-founders is going to speak here at the summit. And we've since grown to serve thousands and thousands of organizations, large and small, helping them to accelerate their businesses and their missions with the right technology. And as we've grown, we've committed ourselves to giving back. This is something that's extremely important to our leadership. Our founders took the 1% pledge, for those of you familiar with that, took the 1% pledge last year and founded Okta for Good. So we're just a year old. And we announced in August that we were launching something called the Okta for Good Fund, a philanthropic fund. And that NetHope was our very first grantee. Yeah. So a first grant is really important, right? It's sort of a signal and to the world in terms of the kind of impact you want to make. It's really a defining thing. And so we did not take this lightly. And out of all of the amazing organizations and worthy causes in the world that we could have granted to, I want to be really clear. We chose NetHope. And we chose to come on as a partner for the center. So you may be asking, well, why? So, we're all here because we are unified by this shared goal of leveraging the power of technology to solve the world's toughest problems, right? And as we talked to Lauren and the team, and quite frankly saw a lot of what she just shared with all of you, it was really compelling. And it was exciting too, because we at Okta, we started to understand that we might be able to help. There was this real sense, I think, among us that all of the expertise that we had gained in the last 10 years, right, on the business and the technology side might be useful here. We also saw an opportunity to really do a new kind of philanthropy, a next-gen kind of philanthropy, not just donating money, donating software licenses, but really digging in and wrapping our arms around our partners and solving hard problems together. And that was extremely important to us. And then finally, and I think maybe most importantly, we just see this as an incredible opportunity to learn. I am here, we are here because we want to learn from all of you. We want you to help us be better and be smarter at serving the nonprofit market. We really see, Okta for Good and the Center as two new initiatives that are going to grow and strengthen alongside each other. And I just have to say, couldn't be more proud and humbled to stand here and go forward with all of you as partners. So I want to thank Lauren for the opportunity and her team, and I look forward to getting to know all of you better this week. So thank you so much.
So Erin's being a little modest. In the sense that they have been super helpful, incredibly helpful, in helping us think about the scope of the center. And one of the things that's been, I think particularly reassuring over the last several months, as we've thought about how do we help support member organizations, is the guidance and the expertise that all of our technology partners that we have reached out to have provided to us. So know that when we when we come and think about the center itself, we're really thinking about the expertise that we've pulled from our technology partners, as well as all of the members that participated in the survey. Some of those conversations, I will tell you, we had set them up for an hour, but some of them lasted an hour and a half, 2 hours, 2.5 hours, because people were really willing to share what their experiences had been, what their experiences are, and where we could help and where they were struggling. And so it's been great to see that partnership. It's been great to kick this off with Erin. And as she said, Freddie, that one of the co-founders will be here on Thursday for our closing keynote. And I would strongly encourage you to come and listen to him. He's been fabulous. He's really been a great partner, and I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say on Friday. And because nothing ever goes as smoothly as I want it to, everybody close your eyes while I skip over the slide that's out of order. Close your eyes, close your eyes. Okay, good. Now you can open your eyes again. Thank you. The next thing I want to do is I want to bring up some members who are actually doing some really interesting work around digital and around technology. Because as I said earlier, part of what we're doing is with the center is trying to be laser focused on identifying places where members are doing interesting things, where things are working, and where we can build upon and build with organizations that are starting to tackle some of these problems or who have already solved some of these challenges. So let me invite up Doug Fountain from Medical Teams International and Nigel Pont from Mercy Corps. Gentlemen. How are you, sir?
Hello. Nice to see you.
Good to see you. Seat.
Where would you like us to?
Oh, why don't you sit right there?
This one?
Yes.
Great.
And I've been staring into that bright light. I got to put my glasses on so I can make sure that I don't forget to ask you guys some key questions. Yes, indeed. My daughter looked at me and she said, "Oh my gosh, you're old." And I said, "Oh my gosh, you're grounded." So, Doug, Medical Teams has done some really interesting work in Uganda and in some of the communities in which you've worked around data collection to address some of the health challenges. Can you tell us a little bit about that project and how it started and where it is?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Hi everybody, and thanks Lauren for the invitation to be here today. This is my first time at NetHope, so I'm really enjoying the opportunity to get to meet people. It's a great thing. Yeah, claps all around for people. Medical Teams responds to the health needs of people who are affected by sudden onset emergencies and other types of prolonged humanitarian crises. So we are exclusively focused on health. We specialize in refugee care, refugee health care in particular. So for example, in Uganda, we are the lead UN implementing partner for health right now for about 1 million people. That includes refugees and a local population. So I'm sensing that my microphone is not working the way that it's supposed to. Okay.
Love it when the batteries start to die. Yeah. That always starts to happen.
It's perfect. All right. We'll switch it out. Do I need to start over? Hello? Hello? Is it working now? Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, I hear myself at least. That's the narcissist in me. I love to hear myself. So I need to start over and give a little sense. I don't know what people could hear. Medical Teams, we respond to the health needs of people who are affected by sudden onset emergencies and other types of humanitarian crisis. We respond in particular to refugee health needs in places like Uganda. In Uganda, we have health programs right now that reach about 1 million people, about 800,000 refugees and about 200,000 host population. Working with is fabulous. They're a great partner. But one of the things that they require is about 77 different paper forms. And that's exciting, especially at the scale that we are working at. So we right now, because we provide health care for about 30,000 people per month in 48 clinics that we staff with about 1,300 people, the paperwork burden is vast, it's enormous. And you can imagine, tally sheets that we have to keep track of. Is it a Ugandan or is it a refugee? Is it a male or a female? Is it a child or an adult? And all of that. And then once a month we go through and hand compile all of that data and send in a report through the UN's lovely Twine system that they do I don't know what with. So we don't actually have any way that we benefit from that system. We don't do any analysis on that. And so we scratched our heads about 2 years ago and said, there's got to be a better way. There has to be something else that we could do. So we worked with a partner, Cambia Health Sciences. Cambia is a parent company in the Pacific Northwest of the US that works with, that actually is a parent company for Blue Cross health insurance plans. And so they are a health insurance company. They came along, worked alongside us to actually develop a mobile app that we could then put in place. And so we developed that. We did a development sprint with them, and we actually rolled that app out in February of this year. It's in 5 clinics right now. We have 124,000 records there. And the whole point of that was to digitize at least a set of these forms. So right now, I think we've digitized only about 10 of the forms, but they are the most commonly used forms that we have. So it's working in 5 clinics. It's working so well that we're now ready to move in the next few months to a nationwide implementation.
Oh, I'm going to go nationwide from 5 to
From 5 to 48, yep, clinics.
You better just jump right in. That's the way to do it. How long did it take you to develop the app?
Well, the first sprint was about a 6-week effort. So we did 2 weeks on site doing very intensive discovery about basic work processes, and then came back and did some prototype work there. Came back to Portland, worked with the team there, and it took about 4 weeks to end up with something that's working.
Quick.
And it's an Android app working on Android tablets.
What's the response been in the field?
Surprising. We rolled it out very carefully, expecting there to be a lot of headwind. And I could talk about the headwinds and the learnings at headquarters, but in the field, the response has been overwhelmingly positive. We set out actually in February to implement in these clinics and run the hand tally process alongside the app. And within about 2 to 3 weeks, people were saying, we don't want to do the paper anymore. We want to do the app. And there were a number of things that led to that. One was that, first off, it was easier. It was faster. We were able to actually get the data out for our reporting purposes. Second, they were, frankly, the clinicians felt valued. This was one of the surprising impacts of this, was the clinicians felt that it added to their professionalism, it helped with their rapport with the patients who were coming in. Even the patients that were coming into the clinics had more confidence because they felt that it's not the chaos of all of the paper all over the desk. It's a simple app and the data get coded in, so people really did appreciate that.
That's interesting. Did it take a lot of training in the field, or was it easy to pick up and run with?
Among the things that made this easy in the field were that people were already used to using mobile phones in different ways. Mm-hmm. So we started with our clinicians, our physicians, and our nurses. They had mobile phones, and as you know, in many of the contexts, many of those are maybe first-generation smartphones, so they're already used to the idea of click and type, and they had some basic orientation to IT in terms of email and all that. So it was not overly difficult to do that. The hard part was all of the organization change on the other side. Why are we doing this? Why are we putting the investment into this? And I liked your point earlier about the mid-level managers. That was something that they were the ones who were very concerned that we would distract our resources to implement the app, when in fact it turned out to be easier. I have to say that a number of partners came alongside to really help. Microsoft in terms of working with us on the Azure instance. So that data that we collect now is all synced daily through the tablets to Azure, and we run dashboards off of Power BI. For that. So what that's doing is starting to change people's appetite for this. Sure. So even at the field office, mid-level managers, all the way to top, people are excited about what it's starting to show.
Impressive.
And we're getting ready. Actually, this week we're launching in Bangladesh with the Rohingya.
Fantastic. That's great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Nicely done. Nigel, Mercy Corps has long been known as a leader in thinking about technology and the work that you do in the field. What are you guys up to these days? Are you still blazing a new path, or you're starting to look at digital transformation? How are you approaching that?
Well, there's a few. Is this working?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, just checking.
I hear you fine.
So there's a number of ways that we're approaching it. So the first is that our program technology, the sort of the T4D field-facing work, we're really putting that on steroids. So led by Alan Donald, who leads that program technology team, we're building some really powerful partnerships. And earlier it was interesting, you sort of referred to how we find these complementary capabilities between different players in the ecosystem and how we really leverage those. So we're paying a lot of attention to that. And in particular, there's some fantastic big new partnership with Cisco and Palantir, really looking at some of the bigger challenges we're facing beyond project level, but really sort of lifting it up a level. So that's a big piece, and we're driving that hard. The other piece is around IT, the sort of the more internal facing pieces of what we do. Now, IT used to be sitting under our CFO in the finance part of the organization, and we've recently moved that to the people and strategy team, which is it's an interesting move to make,
and one that's got some support.
And so it's part of what we talk a lot about innovation at Mercy Corps, and innovation often gets sort of caught up on what are the bright and shiny objects, but there's also a lot of potential for innovation in organizational structure and how we're organized, and as you mentioned again earlier, there's a lot of value that's trapped between historical silos and traditional ways of being organized. And so what we're saying is, let's put together some of the key functions of the organization, which are key to our adaptive capabilities going forward into the new environment: our people, our strategy, and our technology and our internal communications. And let's see what value we can extract by putting those teams together in a single bit of leadership. So those are the first two pieces. And then the second thing that first two pieces, that would be the third thing, yeah? So then the third thing that we're starting to think about more, and we've got a long way to go on this, is like, what does the digital future of Mercy Corps really look like? And how do we build a shared understanding at the strategic level across the organization of the potential of technology to transform how we go about achieving mission, particularly with regards to scale? And so that conversation, it's going to be, an ongoing process through the organization, but it's definitely something that we're really paying more attention to now.
It's an interesting approach, and obviously one that's got some support in the room in terms of thinking about being purposeful and putting IT with the people and the strategy functions in the organization. What did that conversation look like at the leadership level? I mean, was that an easy conversation for the organization to have, or did it feel weird or feel too different to sort of step out in that direction?
Yeah, I think it raised a few eyebrows. But I think on the other hand, I think there is a groundswell realization within the organization and probably within the sector that sort of the old ways of doing things are not quite enabling us even to keep up, let alone stay ahead and break ground. And so I think there is definitely, through no fault of the folks in any of these particular teams, just a sort of a sense of frustration. This isn't really getting us where we need to go. And so to take some risks, to experiment with how we're organized, and also just to sort of open things up for conversation, which have historically been either undiscussable or previous discussions have been so unsatisfactory, people have stopped bothering having those conversations. So I think we're now trying to create a way that we can really discuss the undiscussables, particularly around how technology applies to mission, and hopefully that'll get us somewhere.
Yeah, that's great. I want to point out that both Nigel and Doug, Nigel has and I realize the titles are sometimes less than precise, but Nigel's title is Chief People and Strategy Officer, and Doug's title is Vice President of Strategy and Impact. So it's great to see both of these organizations really thinking about the tie between the work that they're doing from a technology side, as well as to the organizational development, the organization's development, and to how you tie that to the strategic aims of the organization and have impact in the field. So thank you both for joining me this morning, and congratulations on the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Lauren.
So, in the spirit of continuing to build on things that we have started down a path in the past, and building on that as we bring the center to life, I would be completely remiss if I didn't bring our next partner up on stage and spend some time with them, because as many folks know, Microsoft has long been a partner of NetHope and really been deeply involved in a lot of the work that not only NetHope does, but many of our member organizations. I want to invite Justin Spellhog up to the stage with me to have a conversation about the work that Microsoft will be doing with the center, because not only was Microsoft critical in helping us think about the conceptualization of the center, but also has come on as our other founding partner. So Justin, come on up.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
So Justin and I happened to know each other when I was at Microsoft a very long time ago.
A little bit of history.
Just a little bit of history. And many of you may have met Justin in his previous life, but he's back in the Tech for Good Microsoft Philanthropies orbit, and we're thrilled to have you back.
Thank you.
Why, you were in Asia Pacific doing something very different. Why did you decide to come back to this space?
Yeah, well, 20 years at the company. I was previously the COO of Asia Pacific, but I've had the opportunity to build some social businesses in the company. The first business we built was the Unlimited Potential business, looking at how we could lower the cost of computing for emerging markets. That was super energizing. I think we did some good work there. And when Mary Snap and Brad talked to me about building a business dedicated to serving the needs of nonprofits, I jumped at it. My dad built a nonprofit from the ground up and took me on the Meals on Wheels and the minor home repair missions as a very young child. My mom was a social service child abuse investigator for 30 years, and so it's somehow in my blood, and I'm trying to measure up to their big shoes, I think. That's why.
Well, that's great, and it is interesting how much your parents influence you in those kinds of conversations, isn't it? So you're in a new role.
Yeah.
You're going to go build this business to serve the needs of nonprofits. What's your primary focus going to be? What's Tech for Good how's that going to roll out?
Yeah, I think, the view that we have at Microsoft, and I think has been echoed through the room, is that we really are at an inflection point where technology can create exponential impact for nonprofits. This team is a dedicated organization to figure out how we bring that impact forward. By leveraging the work that we've done in philanthropies, bringing our commercial ecosystems together and strengthening those ecosystems, bringing a technology roadmap and innovating actually on our products for nonprofits specifically. And essentially, I negotiated the business model with Brad and Mary, and any profit that this group generates goes back into the nonprofit community in the form of cash grants, donations, technology partnerships, and innovation. So it's a real social business within Microsoft.
That's great.
Yeah.
Why now? What's the timing?
I think we've learned a lot. We've donated $1 billion in cloud technology. We recently hit that milestone. Multiple billions in on-prem technology, $1 billion to employee giving. But when we step back, the magnitude of the challenges that this room is facing is humbling. At the United Nations General Assembly, I think you mentioned the statistic, it's $5 to $6 trillion with a T. Dollar gap annually in solving the challenges that this room is focused on. And so trying to find a way to close that gap, and we do believe technology plays an important role there. And I think everybody at Microsoft, everybody in this room feels an urgency to get after that and help each other out.
Yeah, it is pretty daunting. I use that $100 trillion number a lot because it's big. And the World Economic Forum number about it's going to be created, but then you think, well, but if we're still short $6 trillion and that's 15 years, well, gosh, we're back in the hole and we haven't even started.
Right.
So there's a huge gap that we do have to fill. And,
that's right.
Justin and I recently did a white paper together, thinking about sort of where the opportunities were for digital transformation. And this is one of the things that paper talks about, right? Which is how do we close that gap? Look, Microsoft is a big company. Your products show up in every sector in the economy. But when you look across those sectors and think about how companies work, and then turn a laser focus onto the nonprofit sector, where do you think the opportunities are for our member organizations to start? That was the big question, right? Where do we start?
Well, we have a point of view on that, but I'll reflect on the fact that I had 8 meetings in the last 24 hours with different organizations around this room, and we've been doing some pattern matching, and I'll reflect on those patterns. I think number one, we have to address security. Security is an ever-present threat and opportunity. The mails I get on a weekly basis from organizations in this room and more broadly on challenges that they're facing is humbling, and I think that needs to be the foundation of anything that we do. Second, I think there's a real opportunity to improve and continue to improve donor management and fundraising. A 1% improvement in fundraising drives a $3 billion improvement to this industry. So we're going to be working on our product roadmap to help there. Our technology partnerships, we were on stage with Blackbaud last week announcing a partnership in that area. Team collaboration and efficiencies, as you all know in this room, we have some of the most complex organizations, global footprints operating in every corner of the planet. SOS International is connecting their teams on generators and on 3G, enabling their teams to collaborate and work as one to tell their story, to drive traction on their mission. I think that's a continued scenario. And a scenario that I'm just so passionate about is data, and how we use data to really gain new insights and change the way that we collectively operate for greater impact. Medical Team's international story that was just told up here, the insights that they're now gaining through that data allows them to anticipate where there may be outbreaks rather than react to those outbreaks. And that fundamentally, it may not be rocket science, but it's saving lives. And we need 1,000 more examples like that.
That's right. And I know you guys partnered with MTI on that, and it's great to see not only the impact it's had in those 5 clinics, but now that it's going nationwide and going to Bangladesh.
Huge kudos to them.
Yeah, and well, and the learnings that are going to come out of that are going to be tremendous. So those are all great examples of sort of places of where to start. Where do you see the next steps for the work that you'll be doing, and what other investments are you making in the nonprofit sector? Yeah, we're looking at our product roadmap and a couple of other things. We recently announced last week we'll have Microsoft 365. I should just say every one of our products, every one of our suites, we want to make available to the nonprofit community at the appropriate discount with the right level of affordability. We recently announced Microsoft 365, which is a key tool in that security battle. Recently announced Surface and some different donation programs and discounting programs rather on that. But we also need to make it easier to do business. We've never really engaged this segment in a holistic way before. We've done great donations work. So we're out in November an EA, specially tuned for this room to ensure that we have a consistent, reliable way for this organization to engage and make sure they're getting access to the pricing that they deserve. We're going to be rolling out a cloud solution provider program, ensuring that we're enabling partners around the world to provide nonprofit services and solutions. And we're holding the bar high, by the way, on those partnerships, ensuring it's not just about licensing, but it's about services and support and capacity development to become part of that program. And we hired Eric Arnold, who's somewhere in this room. I don't know if I'd say that. You might. Everybody's going to say yes.
I know, I was not supposed to say that. But to really to speak the truth to us and to our product teams on how do we make sure that when you use our technology, it works out of the box. You don't need an army of people to configure it and to make it work, and that we're really solving problems that matter. So he's on point for the technology strategy.
Well, that's great. And I know we were from the nonprofit side of the house. We were sad to lose Eric, but if he was gonna go anywhere, it's great to see him going to a partner like Microsoft to be able to build that capability. So Microsoft was critical in our thinking around the launch of the Center for the Digital Nonprofit and really coming in early with some support. I know we've talked about some other things that we're going to be doing, and selfishly, I think we should spend some time talking about them. You want to do the honors?
I think one of the things we've been working on with you and others in this room are how do we create a predictable, consistent, and affordable way for nonprofits to engage in the Digital Center for Nonprofits and really bring digital transformation to life. And so we've created a 3-point framework in partnership with NetHope, in partnership with Accenture Development Partners, in partnership with Revel, and in partnership with whoever else wants to join our efforts, that consists of a dream, design, and deliver model. In the dream model, we'll be working with nonprofits, and this is a model that Microsoft and partners are investing in to really determine the scenarios that can transform impact, that where technology really plays a role, and to stack rank those scenarios and walk out with a book of dreams that the board can use, the nonprofit executive team can use to articulate how technology can make a difference. In the design stage, we're funding that with our partners 50%, the nonprofit funds it 50%, and we walk out with two things. One is a specification on how to make that work, but we all know in this room, technology is behind the scenes. In front of the scenes is about the change management strategy, it's about the people. And so also having that change management plan will be an output of that design stage. And then the delivery and implementation of that technology. One that our partners have graciously done is we've negotiated and aligned and agreed on a discounted rate card to make it affordable and predictable for every nonprofit in this room to use this service. And importantly, we want to focus on those scenarios where IP can be generated, whether it's a reference architecture for security, or it's a data model to measure impact of programs, or it's a new way to think about fundraising and improve fundraising effectiveness. All of that IP is shared for this community, for anybody in this community, including all of the partners to build on. And that's an exciting new program. We're going to talk about it, I think, later in the day and tomorrow. We're really fired up about it.
Yeah, that's great. And it's a wonderful first step for the center in terms of thinking about the value that we can bring through our partners to member organizations that want to go and do that, and get that focus on scalable, replicable models. So that's fantastic. Justin will be doing a deep dive session tomorrow. I think it's tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow.
And to really talk about sort of what this dream design deliver. I keep saying discover. Dream design deliver process is going to look like. And part of our conversations that we as a community will be having around the digital NGOs when our cohorts come through, our member organizations come through, how do we work closely with Microsoft to make sure that we're taking advantage of the resources that they have, so that we can continue to build the strength within the center. Justin, thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's been a wonderful conversation and a really wonderful partnership, as always. But I'd love to see us embarking on this new direction.
Look forward to partnering. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Justin. So there you have it. That's the Center for the Digital Nonprofit. Taking the work that we have seen with new partners, building on the work that many of our members are doing, leveraging the expertise that our members have, partnering that with our technology partners who are making meaningful contributions to the sector through the center, pulling it all together so that we can begin to bridge the gap between what we want to achieve and the impact that we want to have across the sector to the needs that exist in communities all around us. Over the next couple of weeks and months, you'll see a lot coming out around the center as we get up and running. Many of you know that we've begun to build a team. J.L. Eckershard, who many of you know, used to be with the Nature Conservancy, and a long-term active NetHope member, has joined us to help shape some of that work. Sandy Haviland, who comes to us from investment banking, has joined us and will be joining us, is sitting right here, to think about how we reach out to sectors beyond technology, and we think about creative ways to make the solutions that we're putting in place sustainable. And Jim Daniel, who many of you know, has been with us for quite some time, will soon be joining us to help us bring his expertise, both from his technology and software experience, as well as his time at Oxfam, to bear. So it's important to us as a membership organization to leverage not only the expertise of everyone in this room, but also to focus some resources on making sure that we have the right folks that can ask the right kinds of questions to make sure that we can build as much value as possible inside the center to help our member organizations. So thank you. Thank you for being part of this journey as we've gotten from a broad conversation a year ago to where we are today. And certainly we'll see much more of this in the coming year. And with that, I'm getting ready to set you loose for lunch. And I gotta do a couple of little housekeeping things. Lunch is that way. right outside the door. Governor Jay Inslee from Washington State will be here and will speak at noon. So I would encourage you to grab some lunch, say hello to some friends that you saw come walk in the back door before you had a chance to say good morning to them earlier today. Grab a cup of coffee, and we'll come back here in just a few minutes to hear Governor Inslee. Thanks very much.